We don't choose between experiences. We choose between the memory of those experiences. So that means that not only have I got to have seen your brand somehow, I've got to have remembered it, and I've got to remember the attributes of it.
Welcome to Be Bold Branding, where we discuss the power of differentiating yourself through your own unique story and standout personal brand. Ignore everything you know about customer service. Well, that's the advice of today's guest, who has written 7 books on the subject. He's an official LinkedIn influencer with 291,000 followers, and LinkedIn recognizes him as one of the world's 150 top influencers. Today, Colin Shaw is going to share his journey with us and the bold moves he made that helped him reach enormous success in the all-important world of customer service. Mm-hmm. But before we let you in on Colin's secrets, hey, hit that subscribe button. It's a big favor to us and helps us make sure that we are bringing the best of the best to you.
Yep, the best of the best, just like Colin Shaw. So welcome, sir. Welcome to Be Bold Branding.
Thank you very much. Yes, it's really good to be on the show, and I love the Be Bold Branding. Is great because that's exactly what you've got to do. You've got to be bold, basically. Yeah. Be bold. Maybe it should say "Be bold or go home" or something like that.
Yep.
I like it.
Exactly.
Hey, jumping right into it, you say you've always been fascinated by how people and customers make decisions and why we behave the way we do. So our first question is, what inspired that curiosity in you?
I've just always been fascinated by how people tick and how people make decisions and why we do what we do. And because the reality is that we like to think that we are logical animals, but we're not. We're very illogical. The one I always use is Disney know when they ask their customers what they want to eat at a theme park. Disney know that people say they'd like to have an option of a salad. Disney also know that people don't eat salads at theme parks. They eat hot dogs and hamburgers. So it's always interesting between what somebody will tell you and then what they do. And even into your personal life and stuff like that, just, understanding why people make decisions and how they make them. And, because I'm sure that you're the same as me. Sometimes you look at people and you go, bloody hell, that was a stupid decision. Where's the logic that underlies that, And there isn't a logic. And that goes to the whole issue. And it's just, I guess it's another human trait of just curiosity, to be honest with you. Why do we do these things, basically?
Mm-hmm. It is fascinating to me. I've always been fascinated by why people do what they do. And as a matter of fact, I've been in the business world. I have almost not gone to business meetings before because I thought, that person's reputation precedes them, and I'm not sure if I want to even work with them. Mm-hmm. And then as I'm sitting there, one particular instance, I'm sitting there having a conversation with this gentleman, and he's fits every other profile for me as a potential customer, right? And I was very hesitant to meet with him just based on his reputation. And then I was taking notes. I pushed my notebook aside and I leaned in and I said, "Tell me how you grew up." And his answer to me changed everything. And today, not only is he, somebody that I, admire very much, we're still good friends today. Yeah. So it fascinates me. And is that why your business is named Beyond Philosophy? Is that where the name came from, or can you expound on that a little?
Over my career, I've met a lot of very clever people, far cleverer than I am. Okay, but being clever is one thing. Being able to implement something that is clever is completely different. So Beyond Philosophy is trying to get over the thought that you've got to have a philosophy or a strategy or a brand that, an image that you're trying to create, but you've then got to go beyond it and do something. So it's the mixture for me, which is the key one, of having that understanding of the why are people doing things, how do they act, what do they, how can you influence what they're doing, and then turning around and saying, okay, now how do I physically go about doing this? Because I can have all these wonderful thoughts, but that means nothing, and it certainly doesn't convert into any business. if it's only just a sort of an intellectual thought. And Tonya, you just said there about meeting this chap, and his reputation. And obviously, when you start, and I know I'm preaching to the converted here, but a brand is just, and a reputation is just a construct in your brain. It's just a perception of what you think somebody is or a brand stands for, and all these things are therefore, you're influenced by all of these subconscious messages that influence how we think about things and influence our decision about whether we like somebody or don't like them. And then we get another piece of information, as you were saying, and you go, oh, blimey, no, I understand where you're coming from. And, they become a friend or whatever. But it's just understanding how those things work. You're going to have to tell me if I talk too much, okay?
We will, don't worry.
Don't you worry.
But let me give you an example. They did a test with Coke, okay, cola, I should say, particularly knowing you're coming from Georgia, Atlanta, with cola, and they said to these people, we want you to test these 2 cola drinks, okay, weren't brand specific, 2 cola drinks, and they had fitted them. They were in a MRI scanner, okay. And it would basically scan in the activity on the brain to find out which parts of the brain were being activated when they were taking this taste test. And the parts of the brain that were activated were the taste sensing areas in the brain. They then said to another group of people, we want you to taste this Coca-Cola or this Pepsi and tell us which you like. And the interesting thing is that the brand part of the brain activity increased dramatically, to show they were making a decision based upon brand rather than taste. And here's the issue. The issue is, if you ask the customer what they were making a decision on, they would say the taste, not realizing all of those subconscious things that are happening inside their brain that are influencing those decisions. And that's the bit that fascinates me, is if you can work out, well, what are those bits that are influencing the customers, and then you can start to focus on what drives value. In other words, what you get as a business.
Yes. You are totally speaking our language right there. Because we talk about this all the time with our customers, our clients, our listeners on the podcast. Some people will say, oh, your customer is going to decide your brand. Your customer is going to just do what you do. And then they're going to, that's just your reputation or whatnot. And we say, no. You can influence that. You should be influencing that. You should be reminding people. And this is going to parlay perfectly into my next question, right? You should be influencing people to be different from your competition. And you talk a lot about that, right?
Yeah.
How important it is. Yeah.
So just building on what you're saying there, for me, it's very simple. People are being influenced. It's whether they're being influenced in the way that you want them to be influenced. Mm-hmm. So they're by being influenced by all the things that you're doing and saying, and all the subconscious messages and everything else that we're giving out. But whether, and this is the word I love, whether it is deliberate, whether it is a strategy that you've got, is a different kettle of fish. And most organizations haven't thought it through at that detail. And therefore you get the classic situation where you phone one department, you phone the marketing department, they tell you one thing. You phone the customer service department, they tell you something else. You talk to the engineer that comes out to fix your cable, they're telling you something else, because they haven't got this united front of where they're going. And that the danger is you've then, to build on your question, I haven't forgotten it, to build on your question, that you've got to be different. Otherwise, it's just going to be mundane and you're the same. My son works for an advertising company in the UK, and they've got this great tagline, which I think is brilliant, which is, when people zig, we zag. Yeah. So, And as you know, I do this podcast where we talk about all this stuff, the intuitive customer, and I've got a newsletter on LinkedIn with 67,000 subscribers as well. And, we talk all about this type of things to be able to go, look, here's the theory. How do we practically go about implementing that now? Which I think is, again, goes back to the key. It's all right going, I need to be different and go, I need to look a bit more like this. And again, the reason I love your podcast is keyword about bold. Some of those decisions are bold. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And boldness is something that a lot of people shy away from. Mm-hmm. You've got to be bold about what you're going to do, and then you've got to go away and do it, and not expect that something's going to happen, change in the next 6 weeks, because life's not like that, unfortunately.
Agreed. Another great takeaway right there, because we do see it. We build incredible brands, and then next thing you know, they're like, well, we're not in that industry anymore. And I'm like, what?
Sure.
Like you pay that money to have that brand built out? Like you did, it blows my mind. And like, honestly, I know we could talk 2 or 3 podcasts about that, about people, like you said, you almost think that we're rational, but we're really not. I deal with it in employing people, or in, I'm in the real estate business. And so getting people to come into my brokerage. And I use this phrase all the time: everybody claims to be a painter until you hand them a brush. And then you're going to be perplexed at the people who cannot paint. They cannot paint. In their mind, they're a painter. In their dreams, they're a painter. They live like a painter. They have paint all over their clothes. They have paint spilt in their car. And then you give them a brush and they can't paint. And you're like, holy me, you are living like a painter. You have not dialed it in yet.
But if you're in real estate, you've seen this millions of times, because buying a house, this place that we got here, we went literally, we bought this in the financial downturn, credit crunch, and we must have seen 50 places. But when we walked into this place, we went, yeah, this is the one. And it was, again, when you look at that choice, it was all of the little decisions. The lounge was nice, the view was good, it was on a lake, it's blah, 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 blah. And all of those come together, and you just intuitively go, yeah, this is the right place. And sometimes it's obviously a compromise between the two, but it becomes an intuitive choice. And that word intuitive is key, because again, when you look at how we make decisions in many ways, but one of the ways is between an intuitive decision and a rational decision. Mm-hmm. Okay. So you've probably had this argument in your mind many times. I know I have. I look at a cream cake and I think to myself, oh, that would be nice. And then I think, no, I shouldn't be doing that. I've eaten enough today. Or I'll go out for a run. No, I don't think I will. And you're having this sort of dialogue in your brain. And that's the difference between the rational part of your brain and the intuitive part of your brain. And they can be in conflict. Mm-hmm. And a brand exists in that intuitive side, so you're intuitively making a decision. I'm a big Apple fan, and everything I have is Apple. I don't think about buying if I'm going to go and buy a Microsoft product or whatever, it doesn't even enter my brain anymore. It's what do Apple have? In the main, I'm going to go and buy that. I have to say, I don't like Siri very much. I don't think that's very good. But, it's in the main, those things are the right things to do. And that's the difference between some of those decision-making points.
Mm-hmm.
Well, mm-hmm. I think too, what we're talking about, we tell everybody, hey, you have a brand, whether you realize it or not. The question for you is, are you being perceived the way you want to be perceived? Mm-hmm. And so in my example of meeting with the gentleman that I met with years ago, I was perceiving him a different way than he wanted to be perceived. So sure. The brand alignment was not there for him. And I think sure. that business, most especially, comes so much easier when the brand that you're putting out there, the brand that precedes you, and in today's digital world, your brand almost always precedes you.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
You put that out there first. It's so much easier to do business if when we show up, we meet that brand, right? It's like, oh, this is similar. This is familiar. This is what I thought it was going to be. This is awesome, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. But so let me build on that, because you're totally right, Tonya. The bit I would add would be, and the brand and the attributes of the brand drive value. So in other words, that will give you, the business owner, some form of return, because clearly there's no point in having an attribute of the brand that doesn't give them a return. Okay.
Right.
The second thing that I would say, and this is an area I've become fascinated with, and again, this goes back to that sort of curiosity and everything else. And I think that this is really worth delving into, is the whole area of memory. Okay. So if you think about, again, a brand or even any experiences, that is dependent upon us remembering something. So there's a guy called Professor Daniel Kahneman, far clever guy than I am. And he's won the Nobel Prize for behavioral economics. And one of the things he says is, we don't choose between experiences. We choose between the memory of those experiences. So if you think about that, okay, we don't choose between experiences. We choose between the memory of those experiences. So that means that not only have I got to have seen your brand somehow, I've got to have remembered it, and I've got to remember the attributes of it. So the question becomes, how are memories formed? Okay, because if you can start to work out how our memories formed, then you can, again, from a practical perspective, go, okay, so what is it I need to do now to affect that, how a memory is formed? And what Kahneman talks about is the fact that one of the ways that we remember things is from what he calls the peak end rule. Okay, so now think about life in general. Okay, and when Kahneman's, by the way, talking about experiences, he's talking about human experiences, not just customer experiences or brand experiences. But when you think about life in general, if I was to say to you, think about the last vacation that you had. Was it good? Was it bad? You undoubtedly think back and you go, yeah, pretty good. And what happened and everything else. But what Kahneman talks about is he remembers the peak end rule. And memories are formed by the peak end rule. And what he talks about is the peak emotion that you felt during that experience. And that can be good or it can be bad. So the peak emotion that you felt and the end emotion that you felt in that experience. And again, it can be good, it can be bad. So the peak end rule. And this is a really good practical example of this. And by the way, we've just done a series of 3 of these on our podcast about memory. But the practical side of this is going, okay, so I'm now about to have an interaction with a customer. Okay, I've got to remember there's a peak and an end. How am I going to evoke that emotion in my customer? What is it I'm going to do to evoke that emotion? And Michael, again, in you being a realtor is a great example, because the way that you show the house, how it looks, all those things, the smell of the cookies and all those things, that helps create that emotion. And how am I going to have that emotion at the end? And Tonya, your example of meeting up with that person, I lay your money, the emotion that you were feeling towards that person when you walked into the meeting and the emotion you felt walking out of the meeting were very different. And clearly, it's something that you have remembered because of those peaks. But it makes you go, okay, so that means that in each of the interactions that we have, we've got to remember that peak end rule, and we've got to work out which emotion are we trying to evoke in our customers. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It does. And if you put it out there ahead of you, which is what we do. We build brands that precede you, right? If you put something that evokes that emotion out ahead of you, it matches what they experience when they're with you. Critical. And that alignment is super, super, super strong, right? So let's segue for just a moment into like customer service. Okay, so which has always fascinated me too. I've actually always said, if somebody asked me, for years now, what would you be doing if you weren't doing what you're doing right now? I would have said, I would be teaching customer service somewhere, because it sucks out there.
Yeah, customer non-service is pretty much what we have.
That's what I would have been teaching. So, having said that, tell us some great examples of customer service you've witnessed.
So the great examples I've always liked, as I say, Apple, Disney, Ritz-Carlton, some of the worst examples, some of the airlines, insert the name of any cable company.
Yes.
All of them.
Yeah, just all a nightmare. But so a couple of interesting stats to just support your case. There's a thing called, I don't know if you've heard of it, it's called the American Customer Satisfaction Institute. It's been going since 1998, and they've measured customer satisfaction ever since then, okay? Believe it or not, we are at the lowest point of customer satisfaction today than we have been for 17 years in the States.
Wow.
So this is the lowest point that it's been for 17 years, okay? And undoubtedly, COVID has had an effect upon that, okay? But it's certainly not all the reason. The biggest thing that I think, and I do want to actually differentiate here between customer service and customer experience. So a customer experience is a more holistic thing. So customer service would fit underneath customer experience, like marketing, branding, you know, and let me also say, the phrase I often use is that brand makes a promise in the market and the customer experience delivers against that promise. So totally agree with you. The brand is out there, it's creating that perception. It's then how does the organization deliver against that? But some key things are being consistent. Again, as you said, Tonya, you've got to be consistent across all the channels that you have to the marketplace. You've got to be honest. You've got to be transparent. We did, for my third book, it's called The DNA of Customer Experience. We did 2 years worth of research with London Business School to identify which emotions drive value. So again, as I say, value, I mean what the organization gets. And the emotions that drive value are things like trust, cared for, happy, pleased. These are all emotions that customers would say that they were feeling, okay, or have been evoked by that interaction, and them feeling valued as a customer, all of those things. And the good thing is there are hard things, detailed things, left brain things that an organization can do. So for instance, if you want to evoke trust, then again, I know this is a key word for you guys, you've got to be authentic, okay? Because when you're authentic, you create trust. But then you can, and again, I'm sure you do this, but diving down into what does authenticity mean? What does that mean that I do when I'm even talking to you now, and all those types of things. So the interesting bit is you can take it again from that theory from I want to create a memory that's up here. Now, how do I do that? Well, I can then start to dive my way down into all the very little detail of things. So even if you go into, you go into Apple, let me talk about Apple. I feel like when I'm going into an Apple store, I feel like I'm going into a club. I don't feel I'm going into a store. It feels like I've got all these other geeks that are around me that just, love the way that the product feels and interacts with each other and everything else. So you can take it down. I think the key thing is you can take it down into some physical actions that you can take away and do. And the opposite applies to, all of the bad experiences. They're not consistent. They really don't care for you. They just want to get you off the phone as soon as they can. The digital experience is awful, so on and so forth.
Yeah, agree wholeheartedly. And expectation has a lot to do with that. I know, when you were talking about big companies that have supposedly good customer service, Verizon at one time, had the best apparently for cellular service. I had my phone fleeced from me at 10 o'clock one time on the West Coast in Carson, California, and called up, we're closed until Monday morning at, 8 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I was like, this is terrible because how can they? But then when I figured out, their customer service is only open from 8 to 8 Eastern Standard Time. Well, now my expectation is the next time I needed them, I'm like, well, no need to call them till tomorrow. I wasn't stressed about it. I wasn't, and I think like your cable company thing, is so on point because they tend to never deliver on a promise. And it doesn't matter how many of us, millions of people say, just don't promise it. They still feel the need to promise it for some reason. And you're like, so don't you think expectations just have a lot to do with that? Yeah.
No, it does, absolutely. And again, not wishing to harp on about it, but again, an expectation is a memory. Okay.
Yeah.
Expectation has only got there. I mean, you weren't born with an expectation when you were a baby as to what cable companies were going to be like.
Right.
You know, that just wasn't the case. The expectation, and if you think about, well, how is that expectation built? That expectation is built by experiences that you've had. Okay, so all the experiences, Verizon's a good example. Its expectations are built by what other people say. So if your friend turns around and says, well, I wouldn't go to Verizon, they've got bad customer service, that influences your expectation. Yep. It's influenced by what other people are doing in similar circumstances. So I'm sure the listener was just sitting there thinking to themselves, well, I didn't go to Verizon, but the same happened to me when I went to AT&T. Or the same happened when I was, a similar type of product set. Yeah. And it's influenced by what's written in the media and just out there on social media. And all these things are conspiring to create this expectation, which is this hidden thing in your brain, again, that you're remembered. And now I'm going to have this experience. And the first thing you do is you pop this up and go, oh, well, this is what I'm expecting to happen. And even in the very definition of going good experience or good service or bad service, it basically means that there's an expectation and it's either got above it or got below it.
Right.
It's as simple as that.
It really is.
But I go back to it. None of that would have happened unless you'd remembered something. So you go back to like the root cause and you go, well, how can we influence that then? What's the thing that we can do there, basically?
Yeah, I agree 100%. So how would you know just how customer-centric your company really is? Is there a way of knowing that?
A good question. That my second book was on customer centricity. There's not one way of knowing it, but there are certainly telltale signs. So let me give you some of the telltale signs. When you contact them, do they turn around and say, your call's important to us, and then keep you waiting for half an hour? Okay, that tells me that they're not customer centric. Do they get you to jump through various different process loops all the time? You got to do this, then you got to do that, then you got to go onto the website. Oh, and by the way, that doesn't happen. Do you get a piece of marketing material? Talking about mobile, I always remember getting in piece of marketing material, phoning them up to take the offer up, and customer service didn't even know that the marketing team had sent out the stuff. I mean, we've all had these experiences. What I've discovered over the years is the biggest change that any organization could make is the way that they look at customers. Okay, so it's not about giving customers everything they want. So let me be very clear. It's not about giving customers everything they want, because you can't afford that. But what you can do is think to yourself, how am I going to make a decision and understand how it will affect the customer? So some of the best organizations would do things like this. So for instance, at Amazon, every meeting they have an empty chair, and that chair is the customer chair. So people then ask, we're just having this meeting, we're discussing all these changes, and somebody takes the role of going, well, I as a customer think that's a good idea, or here's the effect that would have on me. Okay, so you get that in. So Disney, for instance, would ask people to go and work in a Disney park for a couple of weeks, just so they can get close to customers, because the larger the organization, the further away you get from customers. Other organizations would get customer complaints and ask the senior team or management to actually deal with the customer complaints. So they can, again, start to see the issues that they have, and they're not detached. If you're a small business, you tend to know what's happening because you're talking to the customers every day of the week. The larger you get and the further remote the senior team get from the customer, the more problems an organization has in keeping what the customers are expecting, basically.
Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense.
A lot of good practical stuff right there.
It sure does. It sure does.
Yeah, but I think what it talks about is it goes back and talks to the mindset, just to get people to do those things. I always remember when I was back in England, and this was 20 odd years ago before I started Beyond Philosophy, I worked for a communications company and we had 6 values. And I always remember the first value was we put customers first, okay? But we never did. Customers never came first. It was just something that was on the office wall that you could say, have you got values? Yes, we have. Tick. I've ticked the box to say we've got values. Do we do anything about the values? No, we don't.
No, we don't.
But we have them, right?
But we have them. And they're very nice.
They're very nice. Well, I know your podcast called The Intuitive Customer, kind of is going to lead us a little bit into this next question. It's a question we ask all our guests because life is about feeling. It's about experiences. And again, to your point, it's about the memory of those experiences. So if you had the freedom to visit anywhere in the world, Colin, which place would you recommend to our listeners to visit, and why would you recommend that?
And you mean just personal, not from a customer experience? The place my wife and I went to a couple of years ago was the South Island of New Zealand, which was absolutely stunning. And my memory of that and my peak end was exceptionally high because it was just a stunning place. The mountains, the sea. Yeah, just the whole area was it's a bit just untouched by man basically, and really nice. So I would definitely say go to the South Island of New Zealand. Just make sure you don't go there in the winter.
I love that. Yep. I love that. Colin, we've enjoyed this conversation so much, and I encourage you guys to check out the Intuitive Customer podcast. And also any of his 7 books. That's Colin Shaw.
Colin, is there any other way that people can connect with you that you'd like to tell them?
Just connect with us on LinkedIn. As I say, I do this newsletter called Why Customers Buy that you can subscribe on LinkedIn, and just contact us that way. That would be the best way. That
would be awesome. We encourage everybody to do that. We need to know what our customers are thinking. We need to influence what they're thinking so we can have more customers, and your brand's going to do that, guys.
Sure is. All right. Thank you again, Colin. We appreciate you so much.
Thank you so much, Colin. Hey guys, to you out there, the whole reason we do this is prosperity. When we talk about prosperity, we're not just talking about money. We're talking about a true 360 of an abundant life that we wish for every one of y'all. We know at BrandFace that prosperity favors the bold. So we say be bold, especially with your brand. And please connect with Mr. Colin. And thank you, Ms. Tanya.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Brought to you by BrandFace, the only comprehensive personal brand building system across the globe.